thunderstorm here, but
Where are you located? I'm in New York City.
I'm in Pittsburgh. So you've got the same heat wave.
We can use a storm. I wrote my first book about your city.
About the city?
Your city, Seltzertopia, about the 120-year-old Seltzer Works.
Oh. Interesting.
I enjoy learning about it. Yeah.
Uh-huh. How'd you get into that?
That's a great topic for another talk. But the long story short is I wanted to write a book about seltzer and try to figure out how to tell the story. And following this one person who bought this 120-year-old Seltzer Works was the perfect entry point.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'll have to look that up.
All right, so why don't we get started now? If whoever's going to be doing the editing of the video, this is a perfect place to start from. My name is Barry Joseph. I'm an educational consultant in digital design located in New York City. My consultancy, I've had for just about 4 years. And when I thought about what I might be able to contribute to the Education Expert Exchange, I thought about how I start off every single first meeting. This could be a first meeting with a new client. It could be a new staff member. It could be an intern. The structure is always the same. So I wanted to kind of walk through it. And Angela, you're going to be my volunteer. I'm going to pretend you're my new client. All right. Okay. But what it could be real or made up. It's up to you. What would be what's a project we might be working on together?
It could be any project. It doesn't matter.
It has to be something I'm going to be able to talk about in reference. So it can't be too esoteric.
Let's see. I would like to repurpose my Write Habit website, which is a website for creative writers. How's
Great.
That?
You have a website and we're redoing your website. You've hired me to work with you to conceive of and redesign the website. So let's say this is our first meeting. Now, of course, it's not our first meeting. We've had some process where you connected with me or you put out an RFP for people to do it. And we had a process of me submitting something for you that you read and said, this looks good. You like what my work looks like. We had a conversation about how much it would cost or how much budget you had. And we had a legal agreement. So we've had a whole bunch of stuff. And we feel like we've had some connection already. But now is the first time that the work will begin. Now the contract has been signed. Now you've committed the work to be with me. And even though we've done a bunch of stuff already, this is now the beginning to start a new phase of our relationship. So this agenda is designed to establish that transition. It's to make sure that nothing we've assumed that was never fully articulated before doesn't get too much further into the project without being clarified. It's to change some things that we might need to change, and it's to establish some foundation for everything moving forward. And in fact, having the agenda might be the first time we're doing something like this. So I'm now going to open up the agenda so you can see it as well. All right. So this is what I work through. Again, it's almost the same thing with everyone with some slight modifications. And the first thing is to kind of review the project history. It'll be to say to you, Angela, I understand now we're going to work together on redoing your website. That you launched the website 5 years ago when you had a certain set of needs. And about 2 years ago, you realized that your needs had changed. And you needed to readjust the website to do that. But you didn't have the resources then at the time. So you got some additional funds, or raised some money. And you also had an internal workshop with your team to decide what you were looking for. And so then you were ready to start working with somebody. And that's when you contacted me. And this next scope of work that we'll do together is to help you get to the next stage. And then you and I would chat a little bit about, like, did I understand that history right? Maybe there's something about the history that you hadn't told me before that I needed to know that would inform us moving forward. Maybe this is the second time you're redoing the website. It didn't go so well with someone else, so that's why you did it this way instead. So you want me to be aware of those things. Maybe they suggested tools you use that didn't work out, or they cost too much, or they didn't function the way that was intended. Maybe the person you hadn't really fully vetted, and they started out great, but then they disappeared for a while, and that wasn't really good. So then we can kind of address any concerns you have coming into it based on things that you might not have told me about when we were first starting out. So that's this first one, right? Review this project history, which is to get to a narrative of where we come together, right? Because from this point on, it's now us together. So we've made sure that we've established the past, your past, and why I'm interested in working on it. I'm excited to work with you on it because I think it's important to communicate properly to your audience, and I have this background in web design, and it's going to be really great together. So that's our first point. It's to recognize that we have two separate narrative threads, and we're going to tie them together. The second one is to clarify our roles and point of contact. Now, it's just you and me. It's pretty easy. But maybe I've got a team that I brought with me of 5 people. Someone's going to be writing the copy. Someone's going to be doing the graphic design. Someone's going to be doing search engine optimization for you. Someone else is the back end doing the technical stuff for the server. And you have a team of people who are your educational consultants, and you have an advisory group of people who are your audience members who are part of this as well. And then you have someone who needs to approve the stuff that gets written, who's more about like PR. And so this is just kind of this listing everybody. So who are all the names you're going to mention? And I'll need to know who they are. And we'll list them. We'll write them down. I'll describe their roles, and I'll do the same thing for you. But just because we have a list of lots of people doesn't mean anyone can talk to anybody. So the second part of this bullet is to establish lines of communication. Like, Angela, you're going to be the point of contact for your project on your end as the client. I'm going to be the point of contact for you. Sometimes in the meetings, I'll bring in some of the tech folks, and they might contact you if they have questions. But otherwise, I'll send material from them to you, and I'll find out from you what you need from them, and I'll send it to them so that you're not getting emails from lots of places. And I'll ask you the same stuff. Who do you want me to talk to for what things, or is everything just through you? So the first thing is about bringing our narratives together. The second one is figuring out how we'll relate to each other. And much of my work is remote. I work remotely with people all over the world. So it's about establishing those things that maybe you can get pretty quick in person, but it can be also get rather ambiguous online or remote. So it's establishing all those things. So there's points of clarity moving forward. Any questions about the first two so far?
Nope.
So now that we've established how we came together, and we established how we're going to talk to each other and who's going to talk to who, then the third one is the work plan. This is essentially what was in the agreement probably. It says this is the scope of work, here's what the deliverables are going to be, and here's the schedule. No matter how much time has been spent putting it together with the client or with an intern, let's say, I always walk through all of it because the schedule was usually somewhat abstract. Like the first week we'll do this, the second month we'll do that. We now actually mean the next week is the first week, or is this the first week? So it's actually laying it on the calendar and walking through it now to make sure there's no questions that were unresolved. When you say you're going to deliver the report, is it 1 pages or 100 pages? We forgot to put the number in. So it's worth always going back over that scope of work, especially the deliverables, and make sure people understand when it's going to happen, where it's going to happen, and there's no ambiguity about it. The fourth one is the meeting cadence. So, Angela, you're my point of contact. I'm your point of contact. We're going to meet a half hour every week. Let's get it on the calendar now. Let's set that meeting up. And so we'll do that. These meeting agendas meant to be not just a discussion. It's meant to have some deliverables. One of the deliverables is having this meeting cadence all set. Maybe we decide, it's really every other 2 weeks. Or the first few months it needs to be every week, but then we'll do less. Maybe you and I meet for a half hour every week, but 3 members of your team who are core and 3 of mine are going to all meet together once a month. So we kind of figure out all those things, get them on the calendar now. Doesn't mean they can't be changed, doesn't mean they can't be modified, but you don't want to spend time in every meeting scheduling next meeting, and you also want to make sure you have regular meetings. Now, that doesn't mean you can't meet because something's come up and you're like, oh, we need to talk about this. These are to make sure that even if you don't have something on the calendar, you always know you're going to have time to talk. So you can wait for that meeting. One doesn't have to, but they're set. And if that meeting is coming up and you can tell it, we've covered everything we need to do through our Slack communications or email, it can be canceled for just that week. So it kind of maintains these regular points of communication, especially important, again, for remote collaboration. Mm-hmm. The next one is discuss work culture and expectations. So again, in my context, working remote, working with people from different time zones in different industries, it's really important to establish, for me, for the client, when does your workday start? Angela, when does your workday start? Before what time will you not be reading emails?
9 a.m., let's say.
And when does it end? When will you tell me I shouldn't expect to hear from you after a certain period of time?
6 p.m. Eastern time.
All right, 9 to 6 Eastern time. And what days of the week? Just because I work Monday through Friday and usually not on Saturday and Sunday, that doesn't mean that's true for you. Is that your situation?
I sometimes do stuff on the weekend so that I can do errands during the week when nobody else is doing it.
So then we have a conversation. So we might say, you know what? You might say to me, you're going to get something from me on the weekends, but you don't need to respond to it. It can always wait till Monday. But if you want to, you can. And I'll say, you know what? I'd rather have something waiting in my inbox than not. So yeah, please do. Always feel comfortable sending me stuff, knowing that it's not an inconvenience, and I'll always choose whether I want to, if it's after a certain time during the week or on the weekend. So some is about timing, right? And I might say, you know, I don't expect you to respond to stuff at night, but sometimes I work at night, and so if you get that stuff, is that okay? And you might say, yes, that's okay, or not. So that's about the timing. And then other work culture stuff might be like, are there holidays that you have coming up during our time period that I might not be aware of, I need to be conscious of, or even personal vacations? Are there I worked with a client, let's see if I can get this right. What was that word? I consider myself working in the informal learning space. I've been in it for 25 years in New York City. For me, that means people who are working with young people, usually after school, during after school time. It might not be at the school, but it might like be at community center or something. We call ourselves informal learning versus formal learning in the classroom. I work with a client, a major client, you would know them if I said them, and they said they find that the educators they work with don't like the phrase informal learning because it seems secondary. And that was learned by saying, what are the terms and words that we should know about that might be different when you use them and when I use them, so that I could use their language and be respectful of them. So understanding work culture is also understanding what lingo might be internal to that field and also internal to that organization. I worked for the Girl Scouts for many years. They would always start off by saying, these are what these words mean for us. We know they don't mean anything like this to anyone else outside the Girl Scouts, but for whatever reason in our history, this is what they mean for us. And so that became important for me to understand internally, and then to teach any vendor that we brought in would say, if you use this word, it's going to be heard this way. I know it doesn't mean that to you, but it will be heard that way. And so that's part of the work culture things. So those are some examples. But you can imagine on your own, what are other things that like are assumptions that you have that are the air you breathe that might be different than the air someone else is breathing that you're working with? How do you get that stuff in the beginning, get it on the table so you don't discover it down the road when you put a survey together and you use the wrong language that's insulting? Or people tell you after 2 months they actually were getting slowly annoyed over time because you kept contacting them at a certain time in a certain way that they didn't like, but they didn't tell you in the beginning and you didn't know and it was too small to mention, but now it's built up over time, right? So this is the time to kind of try and get all that out. People don't usually know what to talk about here. It's not normative, but the more you talk about it now, the easier I find things will be in the future. And then just keep in mind, you're never going to get it all. There's always going to be stuff you're going to learn later. But you've now established a communication that it's okay to mention these things. You have an open dialogue about it. Your client shouldn't feel comfortable mentioning them when they come up. Do you have any experience, Angela, of doing this in the beginning in a project or not doing it and having it come up and be something that we have to resolve later?
I find this meeting cadence extremely important. And, you know, these types of things about when you'll be reaching out, when it's okay, et cetera. I've never thought of this work culture thing. And I'm curious, like, you know, because things might not come to mind right away for the place in terms of working, you know, it's like obviously companies have a work culture, but they think of that more about working together, not like working with a consultant. Is it helpful to give them examples so they might think of things that you should know about that they wouldn't think of?
Absolutely. So I'll start by mentioning some things like, here's things I need you to know about me. Let's talk about my time and my availability. Let me know yours. I might ask specific questions about words and terms. I might say explicitly, what are terms that are used in your organization that people outside it might not know, right? Do they use it differently? I also might have to talk about process, right? So we have certain deliverables, but they might expect that to mean something else. So for example, I often develop personas with my clients as a part of experience design. And people who haven't done that before and are more quantitative in doing statistical analysis with large numbers don't understand how you can say something meaningful having only connected with 5 people versus 5,000. And so how does that work? So sometimes this work culture and expectations is about explaining the process that we're going to go through, even though they already hired me to do it, even though I made a pitch about it, and it's why they hired me. It doesn't mean they know what those steps will mean. And so sometimes it's aligning different processes together and educating them about what will happen and what role they'll have in that process. So in that client, for example, I started out assuming that they would never want to spend the time being in those focus groups. I thought that it would be a waste of their time. I'm there so they don't have to be there. I'm going to process the learning so they don't have to, and then I'll put it together for them. And then they were like, well, can we come to one? And at first and they're like, we're not going to be visible. We'll turn our cameras off. And I was awkward at first because I didn't want the people I was talking to feel like they're being listened to behind a glass mirror. But we did it. And as soon as it started, I realized how powerful it was. They were now seeing the process that no matter how many times I could describe it, no matter how many ways I tried to paint a picture of what it was about, it all made sense to them as soon as they saw it. And that built the trust in the process and the trust in what I was going to deliver to them. So the next bullet is discuss sign off on process and key schedule. So the process is what I just mentioned, like how are we going to be doing these things? But it's also how are we going to be communicating? I'm going to be giving you a draft, and then you're going to review the draft and you're going to send it back to me. Whoops, let's back up. I'm going to send you a draft. How long do you have before you get it back to me? 3 days. Okay, whenever I send you something, I will expect a response in 3 days. What happens if it doesn't come back in 3 days? Oh, okay, if it doesn't come back in 3 days, I can move forward anyway. Or if it doesn't come back in 3 days, I have to wait, and we will push back the end date on the project. If the end date gets pushed back too much, there's now going to be an overage charge because it's now spending more time, or not. All those things should be worked out in the beginning. Some of the process stuff is also understanding who is going to be signing off what and when. So the process is I'm sending you the document. When you send it back to me, we're good. It might be you're going to send me back feedback, but you need feedback from 2 other people also. In which case I might say, can you aggregate it all together and send it to me all at once? Or if it's time sensitive, maybe it's okay that I get it at different times. And then what's the key schedule for all the key things over the project for when we'll have touch points? I don't just mean when we meet, but when I give you something and when you need to give me something back, whether it's feedback or edits or sign off that something's good. So this is very much, thanks Lucy. Lucy says, structure is excellent. Being an effective consultant is dependent on communication. Agreed. So if we work with the work plan probably has a rough schedule in it. It might be now time to develop it in ways that we never bothered to do before by going exactly into when do you need to have what on your schedule. And that might be when you say, oh, actually 5 months from now when you're going to give me that document and I had 3 days, we have a break at that time and none of us are available. Or a key person on my team is going on maternity leave or is on vacation, right? So we capture all that stuff at the beginning of the sign-off process and the key schedule. Mm-hmm. Then the next one is collaborative tools. And for that one, we're going to open this one up. Now, again, this is collaborative tools, which is tools we will use for collaboration and for communication or, right? And this is just my list. Your list will look completely different depending on who you are and who you're working with. The first one for me is Workflowy. This is what we're using. This is Workflowy. Workflowy is a giant bullet point. That's just super powerful. You can do all sorts of cool stuff with it. It's almost like Google Docs where there's folders and every bullet contains an infinite number of folders. And I can keep clicking on a bullet to go down, and I can also just add to it. So I'll just go here and say after Canva, I'll say the other thing. I just added to it, and I'm going to hit return and then tab, and I'm going to say 1, 2, 3. So it puts it under it. I can click on the dot next to the other thing, boop, and I just jump to that level. There's carrots at the top, so I can go back up to determine collaborative, and I'm here. I can also open and close it. All right. So I use this tool for a number of things. I use it for my agendas, as you can see. I have not been taking notes, but if this was a real meeting between you and me, Angela, I'd be typing and filling in everything we're talking about, all the decisions. We're going to meet once a week for a half hour. You can have 3 days for turnaround. It'll all be here and documented. Also, if there's something to do, Angela to do, I'm going to give it a color. Oops. Blue. And I'll make Angela to do. I can click on Angela to do, and I'll only see your to-dos. So it becomes a way to help organize who's doing what. Over time, I can just click and see it. I can click to make it go away. I can also just remove it when it's done. The Workflowy I use for the agendas, for capturing the key information from the meetings, and also who's supposed to do what next. So I will have, so this is our first meeting, Angela. This is going to be the first in a row of them. So at the top, it might say this is July 20th, 2024. And then the next one, let's say it's next week, June 27th, 2024. And I can open and close it, and we'll have an entire history of all of our conversations, which means we can search through all of them. Didn't we say something a few months ago about that thing about waffles? I can just type in waffles and have it pop up. And let's see what we left from the past that we still have to do. Hash Barry to do or hash Angela to do. It'll all show up. I always tell people they're not required to use it, but I tell them I will be using it. Some people use other tools like Google Docs or something else. I will use it. You're welcome to join it. I will give them direct access at this moment in the meeting. At this moment in the meeting, they'll usually say, oh, I'd like to do that. And then I'll go over here and I'll say share. I add their email address. They then get an email. They make a free account. And they can go in and add to it as well. And it's collaborative. And we can communicate with each other. And then we have this history. And then we start using it for other stuff as well. We can make an evergreen section that's like links that we always need. Here's the link to the development site that we're building for you, Angela. And here's a link to the folder you put together of images we should use and stuff like that. Second one here is Google Docs. And that's my example, what I would use for having files that we can collaborate on together in real time and make a folder. And this is now in the meeting when we'd make a folder in Google Drive. And we would both put our names on it and anyone on your team and my team who needs to be in it. So every time someone makes a new document, they don't have to think, who do I add? And they don't have to communicate it to anyone. They just make it and put it in the folder. We all immediately have access to it. And within any file, you can always say, send to collaborators. So you, again, you don't have to remember their information. It's all right there. And then the important thing in the Google folder is to start making more folders, to start organizing it. You might know in the beginning, you might not. So for us, Angela, for your website, we might make a graphics folder. We might make, what do you call it? An image board, like the idea of things that are out there that you like that might give inspiration for this one. There might be a deliverable section, whatever it might be. You don't want it to be lots of files. You have to decide who's going to be managing those. So Workflow is a place to take notes. Google Docs is for organizing and sharing files. We are not using Zoom right now. We're using a different tool. But we're going to be using something to communicate with each other. I tend to use Zoom. Other people use Google Hangout. There's other options as well. Let's get on the same page about what we're going to use and why, and who's going to be the one setting them up usually, because sometimes you need an account. So that's the third one. The fourth one is about the regular communications. I always prefer something like Slack. Some people use Google Teams. These kind of instant messenger tools that have file management, history, managing accounts, notifications you can turn on and off. I love Slack for that. And if the client's on board with it, then I would say, and let's not use email for anything. Like, there's no need to. Slack is always called the email killer, and if it's used right, it is. But if you have 20 people in your team and one person never goes to the Slack, it doesn't work. It has to be everybody in, or it ends up defaulting back to email. In that case, then you just use email. But again, that's a conversation to have with your client right off the bat. How are we going to do asynchronous communication with each other? And then maybe use a design tool like Figma. Maybe use Canva. If there's an account that you need, those can be added here as well. I tend to not actually have them on the list. I just put them on because other people tend to put them on. But those are things you might want to consider as well. But Lucy says, Slack person and hates Teams. I'm the same. I love Slack. I hate Teams. Angela, what do you prefer to use when you're working with people asynchronously? Email, something else?
I like to use Slack just because so many are on it. And so, you know, I'm in some groups are in Slack. I've got some work stuff that's in Slack. So it's like, for me, it's all in one place. One of my clients had Teams, but it was the only thing in Teams. And it's just like, it was a hassle personally, and you get used to Slack. So it's like,
anyone I work with is a client who requires Teams. It's usually because their organization requires it. And it's a large institution, and there's a financial reason for it. And everyone just kind of deals with it. Lucy's saying, yes, you agree. So looking at this, Workflowy, which is to say a place to take notes. Google Docs, which is to say a place to organize files digitally that you can also collaborate on together. Zoom, which is to say a place to decide where your meetings will happen. Slack or email, which is the asynchronous communication threads. Figma and Canva, which are design tools. Is there anything missing from here, whether as a category or particular things you use, Angela or Lucy, that you'd want to add?
No, I mean, it would depend on the project, right? If we are doing a website together, I guess we'd have on there, well, what are we going to be building this thing in?
Yep, that's right.
But so I think that would just have to do with the specific project. But I think this is the general stuff that.
Thank you, Angela. And Lucy added as a category AI tools. So for me, that would be otter.ai. which is a tool that if this was a Zoom meeting, as soon as it was done, it would send the audio file over to Otter AI. It would automatically transcribe it. It would automatically put in the speaker names if it knows them from the past, or I can put them in with all of the things being said, and it would automatically summarize it for me as well, which is remarkable. And then for me also, I'd use ChatGPT, which I'd use for all sorts of things. Lucy, what when you say AI tools, what ones are you thinking?
Yeah, I use ChatGPT all the time. I mean, half the conferences is
Lucy, we lost your audio. We heard you say half the conference is, and then we lost you. The AI is attacking you. Don't let it get your voice. Still not there.
phone automatically connects.
Now you're in. Lucy, now you're on. We can hear you now.
My phone automatically connects as a microphone to my computer, and it's driving me crazy. I need to fix it somehow. So that's what happened. I really like ChatGPT. I think it's better than, I mean, Claude's a different animal, and I'm not crazy about Gemini, but I do have it. I have Gemini integrated into my Google. I have a Google Apps business account, and it's integrated into that if I want to use it. I just think ChatGPT is awesome. I love how you can build your own chatbot. So I think that's interesting. One thing I did last night with ChatGPT is I want to make a list for everyone of all the, education conferences and when their websites and when their call for proposals were due and that sort of thing. And it wasn't comprehensive, but it would keep going if I kept prompting. So I find that really useful. There's a tool that I use with YouTube videos called Adify. So I like for the keynotes here, I probably will have Adify make a summary of it and put it in the notes of the keynote. What else do I use on a regular basis? I use Canva. I'm not crazy about their AI stuff in general. I love Canva. And then the one thing I need to dig into more is Notion. And I was a Notion user for a while.
Introduce it to us, please.
It is a suite of tools that you can integrate in with Slack or whatever. I don't know where I found out about it, but the consultants directory that I built, that's done in Notion. And they had a template that I adapted for that. And it basically took the spreadsheet of presenter information and put it in there. And then I just tweaked it and added some banners and things like that. And now we have this nice little directory that you can look at in different tabs. So like the first one, I'll find the link for it. The first one is like everybody's picture and, affiliation. And then the next one is all the tags of the presenters who said that they had an interest in certain topics. And so it just turned out really nice. I guess maybe I found out about it because it's a no code kind of tool. But there's a lot you can do with it, and there are a lot of templates, and there's a whole community around this. You should also, you should meet. There's a guy in New York that I do a lot of work with, Don Buckley. You should know him because you guys are in the same city, and he uses a lot of Murally, and I think he uses Murally more than the other one for mind mapping. I have not used Figma at all. But anyway, yeah, Notion's an interesting one, and I'm trying to think if there's anything else. Oh, there's a newsletter I wanted to tell you about too. That's another New York guy, Wonder Tools. It's a Substack from a guy who's a journalism professor, and it's useful for anyone. Here's the link.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this guy, he came to the ISTE conference. Last year, I went from Philadelphia or New York to Philadelphia and back post ISTE, and he was on the train with me. But he's got great stuff, and I like how he's using Substack to gather a following, and he's laying things out in very simple form, but very useful. And I think that's the trick. And the other thing that we talked about with yesterday with another presenter named Wes Fryer, who is incredibly prolific, and I'll find his stuff in a minute. is, as a consultant, how do you grow your mailing list? You have to have some sort of tool for that. And I have not found something that I really like. But Substack is one way to do it. I use MailChimp, and I think it's expensive and it's not very good. So
Agreed.
that's a thing to think about.
Thank you. We could probably have a whole session just filling out the new collaborative tools and communication tools that we all might use and show them off to each other. Great show and tell session. The most important one you've used in the past year,
Yeah, exactly.
All right. So with that, let me go back up a level. And again, you'll see I'm just going to click on the cookie trail at the top. We were just determining collaborative tools, right? And now we're at review project status. Right now, we talked about the project history, kind of how we got to where we are today. The project status is like, okay, we started talking about working on a new website, Angela, 6 weeks ago, right? And we signed the agreement a week ago, but that 3 weeks ago, we started looking at some website ideas and some tools. We started exploring whether, option A was the right look and feel for your option B. Like, we didn't really dig in yet, but we started looking at stuff. So it's kind of, and is there anything new on your side since we signed the contract? You might be like, oh, you know what? You had a host in mind that you want us to work with, but now it changed. So it's kind of like checking in those details. It's different from the first one because review project history is like that big narrative of how everything connects together. This is now getting into the weeds. And we want to get into the weeds because now that's the work itself, right? So you had told us that you were going to have an internal meeting to review something about the website that wasn't working. Did that happen? Anything you want to share from that? So we kind of get into all of those details. Maybe there was some funding you were waiting for. Did that come through? Did that change? So we kind of address those things. Then the next one is I just find useful for all of my conversations at the beginning. Public sharing of the relationship. Do you want me to include this on the blog or do you not want me to? Do you want me to talk about the results of the work when I'm tweeting about it or writing on LinkedIn or not? Maybe you want me to, but only once it's done because you're not sure what's going to come out yet and you want some more confidence, or you're developing something against your competitors. You don't want them to ever know we're doing this work together. It's completely secret. Or yes, you want everyone to know you're doing this. This is so important for you every step of the way. It's an add-on for you if I keep talking about it and bring visibility to it. So everyone has completely different perspectives on this. I rarely know what it's going to be in advance, so I'm always open to it, and I'm always super respectful and really clearly understanding what they want and don't want at the end of it. So you go to my website, you can see who has said that they liked working with us. That's only the ones who said we can say we work together. You can go to my LinkedIn, and you can go to my blog, and you can see the ones that I'm talking about only when it's done. Here's the final product, the final report, the video at the end. And you can see ones where I'm saying, hey, I'm excited to start working on this project, and here's a sneak peek at some of the behind the scenes. Everyone's different about what they want, and everyone who's in my position is different about what they'd want to use. The previous session that I did here at the EEE was about being a thought leader through the written word, which includes in part writing blog posts and writing things on LinkedIn. So this is the intersection of those two sessions. That one was about how you might use what you're doing with a client or in a project to be seen as a thought leader in your space. This is where you're getting permission, public sharing relationship, to make it okay to even do that. You never want to share anything about your work with a client without getting permission writ large, and you don't want to be in a situation where you have to ask every single time. If you have to ask every single time, you'll never have the time to actually get it done. So it's about both establishing that trust early on, if it's not there, learning how to build it, and then getting really clear sense of what the parameters are. Then the last bullet usually doesn't start when we get to it. It's the next steps. So we might be looking at something further up above, and Angela, you might have mentioned with the tools, oh yeah, there's that back-end tool. We need to get access to it. So we'll go down to next steps and add. We'll do it now. Give Barry access to the back end, right? And so as we're working through everything else, the agenda, we're collecting the next steps, saying now is not the time to do it. This is just to establish what we need to do. This is the kickoff meeting, right? But it's now establishing what the agenda items might be for the next meeting or things that need to happen before it. Maybe in the meeting, next time you're going to give me access. Maybe you need to talk to someone on your end to give me access, right? So it's something for you to do. In which case, we'll mark it. Oh, that's a new one. I removed it. Angela to do. and leave it like that. All right. And then once we get to this next step bullet, it's our last one, we then say, what else do we need to do? We say, I need to get access to the back end. We also talked about some other things that are here. Who's responsible for it? When are we expecting it to get done? And what do we need to do to make these things happen? All right. So maybe getting Barry access to the back end means that we need to pay for something, or we need to, hear from someone in another department to get permission. Right? So it's looking through the process for each of these things to happen and documenting them. And then saying, could they wait until we have our next regular meeting, our second one, next week? Do we need a special meeting about that? Are you going to have your own meeting on your side with your own people, or me with mine? I need to schedule them. And then we have a list of all those things. So we've now captured decisions we made along the way, like under regular meeting cadence, it'll say we're meeting on Tuesdays from 2 to 2:30. Discussing work culture, it might say, no emails after 5 o'clock on a Friday. Decisions are made there, but the work itself, the next steps, that'll get listed here at the end. And we review it, we make sure we're on the same page, and then we say, anything else we need to talk about? There might be, we talk about it. If not, we resolve it, and we have a document of all the decisions we've made. We've established a really strong foundation for all of our work moving forward, whether it's for 1 week or 10 years. And we have clear sense of how we get from this first square on our board game of first meeting to the second meeting, what those agenda items might be and the work that's going to happen between now and then. And this is how we start our meeting. So Angela, in your role as pretend client, I'm looking forward to working with you on the website. I'm looking forward to our next meeting. And I will now list the things I said I was going to do. I'm going to send you that document. I'm going to introduce you to so-and-so, and I'm going to send you that website I thought you might look at. And I'm looking forward to getting the stuff from you. Thank you so much. I'll see you on Slack. Talk to you then. And then we kind of end the meeting.
Makes sense.
So now I'm sad there's no website because it's all pretend. But if you do really need a website, good luck working on it, and I think it'll be awesome.
Right.
So sorry about that. So let me ask, is there anything either one of you want to add that are things you always make sure to do or include in your first meetings with clients that I haven't listed here?
One of the things I like to do that falls under this when you're going over sort of how you're going to communicate with each other, just because I think it's inevitable. Most of the people I've worked with, they get inundated with stuff, and sometimes they go dark or whatever. And so to bring that up ahead of time in a nice way, it's sort of like, I know that sometimes things get to the point where it's, you just can't get out from under things, to just establish what are the ways it's okay to bug somebody if you're not hearing back from them. Like, what are the ways that it's okay to really sort of like, get after them? Because a lot of what I come down to a lot of times is somebody says, if you're really not hearing back from me, then it's okay to text. Otherwise, don't text me at all. But that's sort of like the sort of, I don't want to call it an emergency, but if you're really not hearing back from me, that's the way.
You can call it an escalation.
Yes, escalation. Yes, exactly.
Not normal, but it happens sometimes.
Yeah,
and for me, that comes up in defining the roles and points of contact. So you're listing people, and then it might be, depending on the project, let's now make a document in Google where we're all going to go into the spreadsheet and put in the preferred contact. I might put an email address, you might put in a phone number, you might say call me, you might say mobile, and then you can list those escalation lines as well.
Right. Yeah. So I think it's important to call that out, just because, so you don't get into this uncomfortable situation.
That's right. That's a really good point. Thank you.
It comes up so frequently.
Lucy, anything you want to add?
No, I don't. I love this, though. This is really useful and really great because I think like I said earlier, the communication piece is half the battle when you're working with a client, and giving them that structure so that things are done in a timely manner is super important. And letting and taking the lead on it. That's why they're paying you to do it, right? And so having some procedures, and with flexibility, of course, but having some ways of how you work and informing them of how it's going to look is really important. Project management stuff in general is really important. I'm working with a nonprofit that is bare bones, lots of great ideas, but it's really hard to keep keeping track with what they're doing. And so we're using Monday.com.
Mm.
And it's helping, but I think if I don't know how I'm more of a staff person than a project contractor, so it's a little different. But again, that structure is so important.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Lucy.
great.
Thank you both so much. I appreciate spending the time with you today. I appreciate having an opportunity to lay this out. And if you're watching this remotely in the future, I hope this has been useful as well. And if so, and you'd like to reach out to me, please find me on LinkedIn, go to barryjosephconsulting.com, or check me out on Instagram. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Barry.
Be well, everybody. Bye-bye.
Great job. Thank you.
Thanks, Lucy. Bye, Angela.
Bye-bye.